Welcome to Bark. We are addressing attention-seeking behaviors, specifically demand barking, but really a lot of the conversation in this presentation really applies to any attention-seeking behaviors, meaning behaviors that your dog uses to get your attention, typically ones that we would prefer that they not be using to get our attention. So when we talk about demand barking, what does that mean? And basically what it means is that this is a chosen behavior. And this is a key comparative here. A lot of times in these webinars, we're talking about reactive dogs. We're talking about dogs with some behavioral quirks. We're talking about worry dogs or anxious dogs or scared dogs. And in those situations where a dog is barking or growling or having a vocal reaction, we're very often dealing with emotional behaviors, impulsive behaviors, behaviors that are really born out of emotion. The dog isn't deciding to do them. And the difference here is in what's effective in dealing with it, because again, we're going back to understanding that this is a choice the dog is making. They have learned that this behavior elicits a response in the past. So it's operating under operant conditioning. They've learned that there is a setup, there's a situation that they are not getting the thing that the reinforcement they're looking for. The behavior barking leads to a consequence that they want. It's the consequence that they wanted. So they are making this choice. And so it's always important to think about when we're looking, especially at big vocal reactions, big behaviors from our dogs, to consider what the function is, what the dog is trying to achieve with this behavior, and what thought is given behind the behavior. And this is a learned behavior that has a consequence the dog desires. And what they need, what they're looking for, can depend entirely on what they're lacking in the moment. And I think that one of the things that can happen when we talk about, oh, this is a chosen behavior, is we can start to then go, oh, well, the dog is they're being stubborn, they're being spiteful, they're being obnoxious, they're being annoying. And it really isn't, I think, necessarily an accurate perspective, and definitely not a helpful perspective to look at it in terms of the dog is being any of those negative values, because this is really more comparative to infants. Dogs have a limited means of expression. Barking is a way that dogs have learned that they can communicate to us that they need something from us. And what that need is might might depend entirely on what they're lacking in the moment. So barking is an escalation point of a variety of attention-seeking behaviors. There's all sorts of different things that dogs might try to seek attention from their person, whether that's pawing at them, whether that's whining, whether that's mouthing or chewing. There's a lot of different behaviors that dogs will do. And sometimes those first behaviors are things that we have intentionally rewarded in the past. So very often an attention-seeking behavior that a lot of dogs will offer is they'll come up and they'll sit and they'll look at you. And unfortunately, those are the kind of behaviors that if we're not in I'm training this dog mindset, or we're not looking for them to sit because we want them to ask us for something, those are the kind of behaviors that unfortunately, even though we spend so much time training them, and our owners spend so much time training them, and our trainers spend so much time training them, those are the kind of behaviors that tend to get ignored, because if we're engaged in something else and a dog comes up and quietly sits next to us, well, we are likely going to continue doing whatever it was we were doing because it's not a salient behavior to us unless we're kind of intentionally making it one. If we don't see it as a bid for attention, we don't react to it as if it's a bid for attention. Where barking is an interruption into our process, it is much more insistent and much more likely, unfortunately, to elicit the desired response that the dog wants. It gets them what they desire. I'm not sure how well my volume control, my noise dampening in the background is going on, but I have currently a dog who is demand barking at another dog to play in the background. So they also use it for each other. But what does it look like? So in general, you'll see demand barking versus an aggressive or an antagonistic bark or an agonistic bark. Will seem more affiliative overall. You'll still see alert, active body language. Their attention will be geared towards you. But the general description that I'll hear people say about it is that their interest is piqued. They look perked up. Their body language is not going to be as tense. It's not going to be as forward in the face and the body. Their mouth isn't going to be clenched tight. Their eyes are going to be softer, more almond shaped. Even if their ears are pricked up, you might not see as much of that furrow in the brow. So, and it might even be fully neutral body language. The dog might be perfectly balanced. The dog is going to be fully focused on you visually, or they're going to be splitting attention between you and the thing they want if the thing they want isn't right in front of you. So, so that's something that I would keep in mind when you're looking at what demand barking is, and not only what it looks like, but how does it differ from barking that maybe is a defensive bark, is trying to get you to move away, trying to create distance. And usually there's a pretty clear resource or access that they are looking for. So I want to look at a couple of different instances where you can either see and or hear demand barking or demand behaviors. I have 3 different examples. And how you can tell that this is what fits into the context. They are demanding something from their people. So the first one we have up is demanding access. Not only do dogs bark to demand things directly from us, they also will bark at us to demand things that they know that we can provide them. So this is a video of my dog Fig on the dock with her junior handler, my daughter. And while you don't see her demand barking, you will see Cassidy make the very good decision to not allow Fig to run up on her when she's supposed to be holding a weight further back on the dock. And you will see her walk the dog back to where she's supposed to sit. And then you will start hearing Fig bark. And what you won't see until Fig gets quiet is Cassidy coming back and actually giving Fig access and permission to go do the thing she wants to do. It's only when the dog is quiet that Cassidy is giving her that positive consequence, because we want to make sure that the behaviors that we want are reinforced, and that is a quiet, calm wait, not barking and objecting to being asked to sit and wait. So this is our little video of some dock time.
Mm-hmm. She's not, though.
There's Fig's nose. And so she's walking her back. She asked her to sit. Fig is very unhappy. And now it's quiet. So now Cassidy's able to return and give her access to what she wants. So something to keep in mind with this is a very high arousal moment. Fig loves water. She loves doing this sport. She loves working with Cassidy. All of these things have her very, very high up. And that's another piece that you'll see in part of demand barking, is that there will be an increase in arousal, whether that's arousal about treats, arousal about toys, arousal about the activity that they're doing, who they're with, all of the above. There is a heightened arousal level when we're dealing with demand barking. So this is not something that a dog is going to come into the room and start doing. It's going to happen because things are happening, or they have expectations of things happening in their surroundings. So the next thing I'm going to look at is demanding a resource. And this is a really good example of that, where I said that they'll bark at you or they will split attention. In this situation, Leo, one of my boarding dogs, isn't really looking for anything from me except my ability to reach things on the shelf. He is demanding a resource. That resource happens to be a ball that I had put away. But I can tell you right now, he is not looking for me to necessarily throw that ball. He likes to throw it around by himself. So he is demanding a resource. So he's staring up at it. He's going to growl a little, and then he's going to look at me. Excuse me, give me that. And so before all of that, so if you see this body language, drag it back. I can't. I can pause it. So all of that body language you saw, he kind of got more and more perked, more and more attentive to that thing. He even tried to kind of lift himself up to kind of paw, but the exercise ball there obviously isn't a stable surface, so he gave up on that pretty quickly. But he was willing to try other things before the barking started. He's barking directly what he wants, and then he's stopping to check in to say, "Hey, are you paying attention? This is the thing I want." Now, I want to be really, really clear before we go on to the next one. The next one, thankfully, that's about all the demand barking that I can handle in a video. I want to be very clear. This is a clip that I allowed to go on specifically so I could film for this video. This is not going to be an effective manner of shutting down demand barking. And we're going to talk about why letting it continue and basically saying you're not getting what you want, but I'm not going to intervene at all, which basically is an approach known as extinction. We're going to talk about why extinction is probably not your best approach for demand barking and attention-seeking behaviors in general. But that is a great example of demanding a resource. And then the last one, I have a collage because this is about demanding engagement. And you might think, okay, this is very similar to demanding a resource, only it's not barking. It is placing a ball in my lap. But one key difference here is that this is not going to have split attention, right? Because earlier in the video with Leo, you had him looking at the ball that was on the shelf and then looking at me and then immediately redirecting all of his attention at the ball because his attention is focused 100% on what it is he wants, not necessarily on the person he's demanding it from, because for him, he does not care about my part in that. I am no part of what he wants. I am only the means to access what he wants. Where in this situation, this is a demand for engagement. Each one of these moments is Fig shoving a ball at my lap because she is demanding that I engage with her by throwing the ball, and she's going to bring it back to me, and I'm going to throw the ball. And it is a game that we play together. So that's an important detail, is that especially for, if you are working with a dog or dealing with a dog that is not necessarily affiliative but does like toys, be careful about identifying what the function of behavior is, because if you assumed that this behavior also means they want you to play with them, you might end up with even more demand barking because you are just not understanding what they want. And in this situation, if I were to just go, "Oh yeah, here's your ball," and hand her ball, I can promise you from experience, I would have it shoved right back into my face, because this is not about the ball. This is about she wants engagement with me. So demand barking, and this is what we talked about earlier, demand barking is generally seen as an operant behavior, meaning that the dog learned to repeat the behavior because it elicited consequences that the dog desired. So that looks very different than the kind of classical conditioning barking or emotional barking, where dogs are experiencing emotion and having a reaction to that emotion. They are scared, so they are trying to move the thing away. They are worried, so they want to, they want to escape from the situation. So in those situations, these are dogs that need help and reassurance and often support. And food is usually one of the first ways that we can offer that support to our dogs. And in those situations, that reassurance, that those positive emotions resolve the underlying emotion beneath the emotional barking. And because they're able to regulate their emotions, it ends up reducing the behavior, because the behavior really is a symptom of how they're feeling. And if we resolve how they're feeling, they no longer have that symptom. In this case, any attention-seeking behavior, we're dealing much more with So it's an important distinction that demand barking is not going to be dealt with the same way that emotional barking is. And I also want to reiterate that just because one of the things that we're going to discuss in here is kind of how to interrupt and move the dog along for demand barking and demand behaviors, that is not how I would want to approach a dog for whom I think the vocalization or any of the behaviors I'm seeing is coming from an emotional reaction. Because I think that's where we can get things twisted a little bit, because we say, oh, well, don't reward this behavior, and then we see barking in another context and we don't want to give food because we don't want to reward the behavior. That's because in other contexts this barking is really not the behavior the dog is choosing. The dog is having an emotional moment, um, and we can reward them rather than reward them. What we're really doing is helping change those emotions behind the emotional moment. Where in this case, the dog is not having an emotional moment. They want something, and they have learned that this is a way to get that. And what we need to teach them is that no, in fact, this is not the optimal way to do that. And again, I want to stress that just like with infants, this is not a malicious behavior. They are not trying to be manipulative in terms of this is how I get that they just know that barking, like a baby crying, is how they can effectively get a human's attention. And in this moment, what they need is a human's attention. So if we can teach them to give attention in other ways, if we could teach them to regulate in other ways, they can then start choosing those other ways. So how do we do that? Basically, we do that through operant conditioning. So with operant conditioning, which is really what you think of when, most things, when you think of training, you have the ABCs. You have the antecedent, which includes anything that set up the environment that is eliciting this behavior. So if you think about the space that they're in, if you think about, are they in a tight and narrow space? Are they outside? Is there a lot to explore? Are you really the only game in town? Or is the thing that they want the only game in town? What is their learning history surrounding this situation? Do they expect treats? Do they expect a toy? Do they expect access to something in this moment? And what recent behaviors have they shown? And that's where you go into kind of like, what is the level of arousal in this situation? And where are we in terms of levels of excitement and difficulty of control for the dog? And the second piece is behavior. Something really important to keep in mind is when we're looking at operant conditioning and we're looking at antecedent behavior consequence, we're saying, oh, the dog is choosing this behavior. And so that makes it feel like there is a lot under the dog's control in this situation. But that's really untrue. The only piece of operant conditioning is the behavior itself. This is the only piece that's under the dog's control, is what they choose to do with all of that setup that's given to them, all of that stuff, the antecedents that are preceding the behavior. And then from the behavior, the environment responds. And if that response encourages the dog, if that consequence encourages the dog, the behavior is going to increase. If that response discourages the dog, the behavior is going to decrease. And in the next situation where the next set of antecedents is similar, the dog is either going to try that behavior again if it previously worked, or they are going to be more likely to try a different behavior if they saw that their previous behavior didn't work. And that's essentially a very slimmed down version of how operant behavior works, or how operant conditioning works. So looking at antecedents, first and foremost, meeting our dog's needs proactively and setting up their environment makes a huge difference in whether or not we even start to see that behavior establish itself. So different things can help achieve this. Providing chews and licky toys, things that are going to give the dog a lot of things to do, a lot of ways to burn their energy, give them reinforcement, help them be emotionally comfortable in potentially scary situations, but things that don't come directly from us. things that we are not, going back to Leo demanding that resource, things that we are not necessarily a part of. But unlike Leo, things that are accessible to them in that moment. Meeting their enrichment needs. So thinking about not only food, but what activities do they like to do? Are they always in trouble for digging, or are they always in trouble for shredding? Do they really, really enjoy a particular toy? Do they really enjoy fetch? Meeting their enrichment needs and meeting their exercise, their physical activity needs, helps a lot in resolving those demand and attention seeking behaviors, because if they're fulfilled, they're going to need less from us. And then secondly, interrupting warning signs of demand or attention seeking behavior. So that might look like that, intense attention on us. That might look like, after we finish a session with treats, we're going to finish with a treat scatter, or finish with a licky toy, or finish with, a game of fetch, or time in the dig pit, or whatever that looks like for that individual dog, a box to rip up. But interrupting those warning signs, or those moments where they may be seeking a lot of attention, redirecting them before the behavior escalates. So in this moment, back to Leo. In this moment, right about there, I have an opportunity. That opportunity is, one, I could read what he's saying, because right now he's doing the right thing, right? He's doing the thing that we want our dogs to do, which is, when they are demanding a resource, when they're asking for something from us, we'd like them to sit quietly and ask for it. And he does a beautiful job of that there. He sits, he looks at the ball, he looks at me, he looks back at the ball, and he goes, hey, I would like that. One thing that I could do to prevent the behavior from escalating is give him the ball. And if it's a treat they want, it's maybe giving him a treat scatter. It's giving him a chew. Whatever resource they value, giving that to them before they escalate in their behavior. Or redirect him elsewhere. So if he can't have that ball for whatever reason, okay, bud, we're going to go outside. Okay, we're going to go up. Bringing him out of this environment where everything about the antecedent structure here, he's not being otherwise attended to. He's got that resource that he loves right in front of him. He is clearly fixated on it. He is clearly amping himself up about it. All of those things lend themselves to an antecedent arrangement that is going to yield exactly what it yields. He tries to see if he can just go get it himself. If he can't do that, the ball's not stable, he's going to bark at it. So we can start to, adjust things in that way, by redirecting them before the behavior escalates, and stopping it when you notice those little signs that maybe they are headed towards a demand barking episode. And then lastly, intermittent reinforcement delivery. So in general, not rewarding every single sit, not rewarding every single eye contact, and starting to add, more duration to certain behaviors. So if they sit, maybe they need to wait 30 seconds before they get a treat. But it's not 30 seconds every time. It's not 30 seconds and then 45 seconds and then 60 seconds and then a minute and a half. It's not a consistent increasing amount. We're going to go 30 seconds and then 5 seconds and then 15 and then 45 and then 5 again. Changing up the reinforcement delivery, because that reduces their specific expectations of either I get a treat every blank seconds from this person, and when I don't get that treat, I'm going to yell, or I am being made to wait longer and longer every time, and I'm losing patience with this, and I am going to yell. So then we get to that yelling. So we get to the behavior. Again, this is the only piece of the puzzle that dogs can control. And just like when we're talking about ladders of aggression, they'll very often follow a similar escalation ladder to get to that demand barking. So you'll very often see eye contact and offered behaviors first. So that's where you'll see, you saw Leo kind of look over towards me and then back to the ball. He offered eye contact. He was offering a sit. Very often dogs will come up to you and offer a sit. You have for Fig, that giving me the ball is in and of itself an offered behavior. She is offering me the ball and saying, hey, I would like you to play with this. I'm going to maintain eye contact with you until you do that. At a different time in her life, that behavior absolutely would have then escalated into demand barking. Sometimes it still does. Most of the time it doesn't, because we know that we can interrupt it before it escalates to that. You'll also very often see dogs paw at you or maybe mouth your hand, depending on their degree of comfort with you, their level of affiliative contact with people, and whether that's something that they're comfortable with. But you will see them kind of continuing to seek physical attention from you, or reinforcement, or behaviors that have been reinforced before, reinforcement driven behaviors. So you'll see sits offered and downs. Some dogs will offer a paw. Some dogs will offer a nose touch. Dogs who have done a lot of tricks, I've had dogs offer a spin or offer a middle. Then you'll start hearing a little bit of vocalization. Often that'll start as whining or huffing. You heard Leo do a nice low growl before he started barking. So those little noises come before the big noises. And very often the dog will start pacing or seem unsettled. If they want something, they're not going to just settle down on their own without help, because they are trying different behaviors to achieve whatever it is their goal is, whatever they're looking for. And so, as they're looking to achieve that, we have options. And those options are the consequences that the environment provides for them. We are part of the environment and we are in control of a lot of their resources. So, here's where we get into possible consequences in terms of operant conditioning, very, very broadly. There are 4 quadrants of potential consequences for these dogs or for any learners. Either adding something that a dog wants to work for, that they want to have, that will increase the behaviors that they're showing, and that is positive reinforcement. Now, the important thing about all of these is that positive reinforcement, punishment, whatever, all of this is defined by the dog. If we give them what we consider to be a reinforcer that they don't want, it was not reinforcing. No matter how tasty the cookie we think is, it's not reinforcing if it doesn't increase the behavior. We can also remove something that they wanted, and that's negative punishment. This is something, as positive trainers, we generally stay in the positive reinforcement realm. That's the quadrant we want to be in. However, it is impossible to live only in one quadrant. There are generally accepted positive quote unquote behaviors that fall into other realms. Comfort on those depends on the individual. And there is just simply the fact that the environment is punishing, and there are behaviors that we do want to punish in an operant sense. Because remember, punishment in an operant sense is not a negative sentiment. There's not an emotional, moral, or ethical connotation to it at all. Punishment is merely a consequence that decreases a behavior. And what we want for demand barking is we would like that behavior to decrease. So we can remove something they want, which is taking away, that's the negative part, and reducing their will workforce. That's the punishment part. We can also add something they don't want. That's positive punishment. Or we can remove something they didn't like, and that's negative reinforcement. So removing something that they didn't like in the environment. So examples: turning away from a jumping dog. That's intended to be a negative punisher. Depending on the dog, it may or may not be. But it is taking something away that they wanted. They wanted attention from the human. The human turns or walks away. They don't get that. Ideally, that should decrease the behavior of jumping. We put, some trainers will put baking sheets or similar unpleasant surfaces on the couch if they want the dog to stop jumping on it. That would be intended as a positive punisher. They jump up on the couch. Something has been added to the couch that the dog will not like to step on. The behavior will decrease. Any work with leash pressure, teaching it as a cue, giving a little bit of a, stopping when a dog is pulling and letting them push into the leash, and then when they remove, give them a treat. That's a combination of negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. Something they didn't like was removed. That leash pressure was removed when they came off of it, when they stopped pulling, and we're adding a treat. So adding something they will work for, with the desire to increase the behavior of keeping a loose leash. So generally speaking, the goal is to be kind, to be clear, and be fair to the dog, and not generate negative emotions with our actions. We want to do things, we want to take action that will help the dog understand what is expected of them in the moment and how to access the reinforcers that they want without creating negative emotions around the situation. And that's our goal as positive reinforcement trainers. So, when we're thinking about consequences for this, so they are barking. What do we do now? Our options, generally speaking, are going to be extinction, negative punishment, and interruption and redirection. So, first, extinction, essentially demonstrating that the behavior will not elicit any reaction at all. The example that a lot of trainers will use when talking about extinction is outside of the dog world. If you are using a vending machine and you use this vending machine every single day, and you always get the same, you have your F3 and you get your chips and you walk out. And then one day you enter F3 and the machine spins and nothing happens. And you can see the chips are there. You know they're there. You know they're available. You might put some more money in. You might try your behavior again, because that behavior of putting money in the vending machine has always elicited the response that you've wanted. You get your chips. And the machine whirs and it goes again. It doesn't go. Now, you might try again. You might put more money in that vending machine, or you might go, well, that's not working. I don't know why that's not working. So you might go, well, I saw it move a little bit. What if I shake the vending machine? What if I rattle the vending machine? That is an extinction burst. That is escalating your reaction, your response, in response to not getting the expected consequence for your actions. And extinction bursts can be tough to work through. Or, and this is the ideal response, or you might go, oh, vending machine isn't working today, and leave. And that's the extinction part of an extinction training plan, is that the behavior stops because it is not eliciting a reaction. You also have negative punishment, so demonstrating that the behavior will elicit a consequence the dog doesn't want. So that would be, if we talk about jumping, turning around and leaving the room if the dog goes to jump on you. That's a negative punishment. If they're looking for your attention and you remove your attention, then the behavior is decreased, because the dog learns that barking or jumping causes you to leave, and they don't want that, so they stop performing that behavior. And then lastly is interruption and redirection, is exactly what it sounds like, interrupting the behavior to stop it from happening right now, and then identifying an alternate behavior the dog can engage in. So let's go through each of these, because there's some problems in all of them. Extinction is the first one. I really don't recommend extinction. This is where reducing or just stopping treats ends up being a challenge, because it potentially creates punishment for the human and trigger stacking. If we just sit there and listen to the barking until we wait for it to stop, and our goal is to basically gray rock the dog, well, it is challenging to sit there. There is a reason that demand barking works. There is a reason that demand barking tends to elicit a response from the human that it's being barked at. It is a difficult sound to ignore, and it is a sound that is punishing for our nervous system. We want to make that noise stop. And so we will tend to do things that make it stop. So if we are trying not to do anything to make it stop and the barking continues, we have to think about our own trigger stacking. What is our nervous system doing? What is our arousal level doing as that barking continues? And how long is it going to be before that behavior provokes a reaction in us? And how long is it before we bark back? Secondly, there's frustration for the dog. The dog is not necessarily, extinction is not a quick way to learn things for a dog. Especially if there's a long history of demand barking, especially if barking has worked before, and we just discussed how well demand barking tends to work. It is frustrating for the dog. And when a dog is frustrated, that amps their arousal up. And now they are trigger stacking because they not only are not getting the thing they want, but they don't understand why. There's not a lot of clarity in this. And there's often going to be issues with consistency and intermittent reinforcement. There are going to be times, if you think about quiet hours, if you think about, vet offices, places where people really don't want their dogs to just be barking without interruption, there are going to be times when we do end up giving the dog what they want, or someone ends up giving the dog what they want, so they stop barking. And immediately then we have something that's called an intermittent reinforcement schedule, where sometimes the behavior gets rewarded and sometimes the behavior doesn't. And if you think back, what did I just recommend we do with treats as an antecedent for not getting demand barking? Intermittent reinforcement delivery of treats to reduce expectations so the dog's behavior, the good behaviors, continue to strengthen because they don't know when they might get a reward. So they are continually motivated by it. So if they don't know when they will get rewarded for barking because they are intermittently reinforced and they could be reinforced for it at any moment, you are strengthening that behavior. You are making it stronger. They're going to be a better demand barker because every so often they get a reward for it and it keeps them motivated. Think about the vending machine that, you just shake that and, random stuff falls out and it works about 50% of the time. Absolutely, you're going to keep shaking that vending machine because that works. And then lastly is that extinction burst. Probably not problematic if you're shaking a vending machine. But if you have a dog, especially a behaviorally complex dog, an extinction burst could become a real problem depending on what behaviors they escalate to when they are frustrated by the lack of response to their typically reinforcing behavior. All of those are big potential problems with just looking for extinction when the dog is barking. All of this also assumes that the behavior they're taking part in isn't reinforcing within the environment outside of us. So everything we've talked about up till this point is access that we control, right? In the first examples I shared, Fig wanted Cassidy to throw the bumper so she could jump in the pool after the bumper. It is not fun for Fig to just jump in the pool. She cannot do it by herself. She needs someone to throw the thing, give her permission to chase the thing, and jump into the pool. That whole process is what's reinforcing for her. For the ball, Leo established he could not get the ball himself. He needed me to get the ball. And, lastly, Fig wants engagement with me. Obviously, I'm involved in that. But we are not the only things in the environment. And there are things that are happening for the dog as part of the behavior of demand barking. They are expelling energy. They are voicing their frustration. There is value in venting. And if you think about what the dog is doing in human terms, they're venting their complaints. And there is a relief in that. There is a reinforcement in that. And the challenge that you end up with extinction, even if nothing else in this list is happening, is that the behavior in and of itself is still going to have rewards associated with it. And then we have negative punishment. So negative punishment, again, is the example of, potentially leaving the room. The dog starts barking at you and you just walk out the door. Idea being the dog wants something that only you can provide them. You leaving is not what the dog is going for, is the opposite of what the dog is going for, so the behavior will decrease. However, depending on the dog, we might have big problems with this, particularly surrounding any separation-related behaviors and immature dog problems. One could potentially create a stressful situation. If the dog has separation distress, if they are worried about that, you've got trigger stacking because now you're leaving. And that's going to create additional frustration and fear and anxiety. You also potentially have a destructive or dangerous situation for dogs that might expend their energy on something fun. Remember, you've got a highly aroused dog here because they're demand barking. We know that their arousal is high. What are they going to look to get into if you are not present? Some dogs would be entirely safe. Other dogs might get into something else that we really don't want them to expend their energy on. It can often be a barrier to meeting your goals. This is not a sustainable solution. You can't walk out the room every time a dog barks. And then lastly, there is, the ethical question of if the punishment is fair or appropriate. Just leaving is often similar to extinction. It's not clear to the dog what they are being punished for, why you are leaving. And if it isn't clear, that's not going to be fair. And that's not necessarily going to be, the least intrusive, the minimally aversive response that we want to give in every training scenario that we can. And then similar to extinction, there is one assumption that, even if none of these other potential problems are an issue in the particular situation we're in, it assumes that the consequence of us leaving is not rewarding. And for conflicted dogs who are unsure if they're, if they want to be social, unsure about if they want interaction, unsure if they are comfortable with your presence in the room, you leaving can also be a reinforcement. It's not necessarily a reinforcement for what they were angling for in the moment, but it could be a larger reinforcer. And they could very easily from there learn that barking makes people go away. And if you're dealing with a behaviorally complex dog, teaching them intentionally that barking makes people go away is not setting you up for success in other areas of their training, in other areas of their life. So negative punishment also comes with a whole host of problems that makes it not super ideal for addressing attention-seeking behaviors, addressing demand barking. So this leaves interruption and redirection. So the big question that gets asked about interrupting and redirecting behavior is that there's going to be something the dog wants in the redirection. We're redirecting them to something else to do. Doesn't this reward the behavior? And I am not the person who's going to say, no, it doesn't. Because absolutely, yes, it potentially could reward the behavior. Behaviors don't exist in a vacuum. I always advocate for asking for other behaviors between the undesirable behavior and the reward you're going to give them as part of the redirection. But behavior chains exist. Dogs chain behaviors very quickly, some dogs more quickly than others. And so if they learn that, oh, I bark and then I go over there and then she gives me a treat, yes, potentially you could be creating a problematic behavior chain there. But there are other, in my mind, higher advantages to this approach, because it's also acknowledging that the dog is making an effort to communicate with you. The dog is communicating something to you, and you are acknowledging that communication. It also acknowledges that there is an unmet need for this dog, whether or not you view it as a need, because maybe we've been throwing a ball for 20 minutes and maybe we don't think the dog needs to chase the ball another time. The dog believes this to be an unmet need. And it also acknowledges that there was a gap in our antecedent arrangement. And I think that's the biggest advantage to looking at things from a perspective of interruption and redirection, is that it takes the responsibility of the demand barking off of the dog's behavior, which is, again, the only thing the dog can control, and really the primary thing that we cannot control, and puts the responsibility and therefore the control on us in how we are setting up our antecedents, how we are setting up the situation. In addition, it also stops further rehearsal of the behavior. Go back again to Leo's video, right? Think about how long he spent barking at that ball. Even in that little video, even though I stopped him pretty much immediately after I finished taking that video, I stopped and I redirected him. However, this is a long time. He's asking for it. He looks to me. He asks for it again. He tries to get to it. One bark, two bark. Again, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm losing count. Several repetitions of the barking behavior, several sets of checking in and then going back to barking, checking in and going back to barking. This has been, if we consider that the barking itself is potentially inherently reinforcing, this behavior has been reinforced upwards of 20 times in just 30 seconds about. That's a whole lot of reinforcement to get to, or to try to get to, an extinction burst. And I can tell you, had I not interrupted this behavior was not extinguished. I can promise you. This behavior would have needed a lot more to extinguish the behavior. So it's also stopping further rehearsal of the behavior. And that's honestly the biggest thing that you can do in the moment. If you think about it in terms, in this narrow part of perspective, if you think about it in terms of working with reactivity, this is your management. This is, we are going to stop this behavior from happening, this reaction from happening, and we're going to replace it with something else. And I understand that maybe we are not in an ideal position, and maybe this rewards something I don't want to reward, but it's also addressing more important things. The other piece of this that can potentially reduce the amount of reinforcement you're providing for the behavior is you don't have to provide the exact kind of engagement, the exact kind of attention the dog was demanding. So what does that mean? That means that if they're demanding food, you can give them non-food reinforcers. So this can include a lot of different things. It can be play, if the dog enjoys toys. It can be permission, going outside. It can be peace and quiet. If the dog is one that would be reinforced by you just leaving them alone to sleep, you can leave them alone to sleep for a little bit. Or giving them a different treat or a chew, especially something that doesn't come directly from you, in the form of a puzzle rather than the thing that they were barking for. So let's take a look and talk about what these might be. So the first example being play. So here's my little Chihuahua when he was a baby puppy, playing tug and fetch. So playing tug, playing fetch. Both of these, I really, really like using two toys. You can see that my little one has a little bit of possession. He's a little bit of a resource guarder. And I use, when I was teaching drop, I used two toys to avoid conflict. If he didn't want to give me one, fine, that's fine. I'm going to play with the other one, and then I'll throw the other one for you. You can also use a flirt pole, another really nice toy that gets a lot of energy out without you needing to get too close, too much into the dog's space, as well as not having to move a whole lot. You don't need to do a whole lot in order to work a flirt pole. If your dog is very ball motivated, you can play hide the ball. You can also play hide the treat, getting them to sniff things out. And then there's also social play. If the dog likes to roughhouse, if the dog likes to play physically with you, that's another option for a reinforcer. And then we have puzzles. So that might involve food, but it's likely not going to involve food the same way that you were previously delivering it. So that might be a snuffle mat, either indoors, a actual functional snuffle mat, or using the grass outside as a snuffle mat. You can do a long-lasting chew or topple. You can play some cognitive games, teach some tricks. You can lay out a trail of treats and do a food treasure hunt. So while these are food reinforcers, some of the reinforcement also comes from the work, and it takes you out of the equation. So they're no longer demanding the food from you because you are no longer providing access to the food. They are managing that themselves. They are working on accessing the food independently of you. Then you can have permission. So this is Fig asking for permission to keep going down the trail. But what does the dog like to do independently? You can use your environment as a source of enjoyment, and that's a very, very powerful reinforcer. So whether what they would like is to go outside, to go for a walk, to be affectionate, to access something they like, if they have like a dig pit, or if they have a ball pit or something that they like to play in, being able to access something that they like is another really powerful way to harness some other reinforcements that aren't necessarily food. And lastly, giving them peace, especially if the dog is conflicted or is demanding engagement, but is also concerned if they would value being left to their own devices. You can send them to a mat or to their crate for a little while. You can leave them be, leave the room. Only once the barking is stopped. Again, don't let them learn that they can chase people out of the room by barking. Or you could turn on some other white noise or dog TV. Lots of dogs actually really enjoy watching TV. So having something playing for them, having some recharge time for them can also absolutely be a reinforcement in and of itself for some dogs. So the big thing to do after a demand barking episode is remember Bob Bailey's phenomenal directive in all training plans, and especially Susan Garrett's addendum to Bob Bailey's direction about all training plans. Take note of what redirections that individual dog values. What works really well? What do they immediately throw themselves into? And prioritize those activities proactively before the barking starts to prevent it from starting in the future. So that's your think, plan, do. And then when you have the consequences of what you thought about, what you planned, and what you did, you're going to redo that and think, plan, and do again based on those consequences, because we are also motivated by our consequences. And we also want to keep in mind what was reinforcing for our goals. So as you're thinking about that, think about when the barking occurs. Is it when you first get there because they are excited and amped up? Is it when you are trying to relax or trying to take some downtime, or when you're on your phone? Is it immediately after the treats stop, after you've been doing some training or some reinforcement with them? When does the barking happen? And how can we better communicate our expectations about that moment? So if the barking happens when we come in, does opening the door and practicing opening the door and doing a food scatter help? If it happens immediately after we're done a reinforcement or training session, does directing the dog to what they're doing next immediately help? Does it help to go, okay, we have done our training session, go outside now. We have done our training session, come inside now, go to your crate. Whatever the next thing is, can we communicate our expectations about what the dog is supposed to do next better than we have been? Have we prioritized their needs? If they are barking as soon as we come in, or they're demand barking at us as we are getting food ready or getting meds ready, is there something we can do first and then get their food ready? And just rethinking reinforcers and the relationship. Are we using the reinforcers that are of most value to our dog? Are we using reinforcers in a way that are communicating what we expect, that are prioritizing their needs? So really kind of considering that as a whole and making sure that we are setting up that antecedent arrangement, setting up that situation for as much success as possible. So again, looking at communicating expectations, considering the emotional element, potentially teaching them an all done cue. I will do all done in sign language at the end of my training sessions, and usually I end it with a treat scatter or a puzzle or something, directing them to an activity, something for them to shred, something for them to dig, something that they can do independently to kind of show them, okay, we are done doing interaction with me. Now we are going to do interaction by yourself. One of my best examples of this was my own dog, Mouse, who went from being a couch potato who I occasionally did some training with, to my sole dog that I only trained with during the 2020 pandemic. And she also very quickly became my demo dog. She was never my demo dog in in-person classes because she struggled with reactivity for her whole life, and that is not a environment that, while she could have handled it, it's not an environment she would have enjoyed. But when I needed a demo dog for my virtual lessons, that was the demo dog that I had at the time. So she would do her demonstration, and then, me not having had a demo dog before, I would just go back to talking to the people, because usually I used the dog in class. Since I didn't have a dedicated demo dog, I would use the dog in class. I would hand them back to their people, and I would go back to teaching. So I would do the demonstration, and then I would go back to teaching. Well, Mouse found this incredibly disorienting, because she was having these intermittent uh, moments of some very intense, like, engagement and reinforcement and a lot of work. And then all of a sudden, all that attention would just get turned off, and all communication would stop. I would go to her blank faced and inattentive, because I was then engaging with the screen. And she got so distressed that she started doing something that she had never, in her 2020 was 9 years of life, she had never done before, which was she started humping my leg, because that was her expression of a lot of energy that she didn't know what to do with. And ultimately, I wasn't communicating my expectations with her. I wasn't telling her, hey, I'm going to need you for this, and then I'm going to go back to talking to the screen, and I expect you to just kind of hang out and be on standby. I needed to teach her that. So what solved that situation was just sending her to a mat after her demonstration. Send her to a mat. I gave her a chew, and then I went back to talking to my class. Being able to communicate those expectations ended the humping behavior, because it gave her a clear understanding of what we were doing and what she was to be doing next. And lastly is the 100 or none rule, which is the idea that we give a lot of intermittent reinforcement for dogs throughout the day, throughout our time with them, by casually giving attention when they seek it. When they nose under our hand, we scratch their heads. When they bark at us, we give them, their water. When they offer behaviors, we take them for a walk. Instead, making sure that if we are not giving attention to the dog right now, if we are preparing food, if we are preparing medication, if we are sitting on the couch, if we are, checking on other things in the house, doing other things, we are not giving attention. And if we decide to give our dog attention, we are giving them 100% of our attention, and we are not multitasking by giving them attention while we prepare the food, while we scroll on our phones, while we do other things around the house. They get 100% of our focus if we are focused on them. And if we are not, again, we have that clear expectations, that clarity. If we are not focused on them, they are not going to expect attention. Again, that's part of getting them off an intermittent reinforcement schedule that strengthens behaviors. Then prioritizing needs. I say their agenda and their communication, and really considering, when I think about what's going to happen when I walk in the door. This is what I want to get done. These are the things I need to do. This is what I have to do. And we very naturally are usually just considering our own agenda of what our checklist is of the things that we need to do when we are interacting with these dogs. They have their own agenda. They have their own things that they want to do. They are very good and very effective at communicating those things. And to ask, can we prioritize those agendas? Are we able to do a tug session before a walk? Because what they really need is to get some of that mouth energy out, and what they really need is play before they go for a walk. Even though maybe they do really need to potty, what they really need is play. And how can we kind of identify what their priorities are, what their agenda is, so we aren't in conflict that leads to those attention seeking, those demanding behaviors. And in terms of rethinking reinforcers in relationship, changing up how and what we are using for reinforcing, not centering ourselves, decentering the person, and making sure to consider these pieces of what the dog needs in the situation and how the situation looks to the dog. And in terms of varying reinforcement and setting those expectations, my example with Fig, how I would resolve this if I cared to. Honestly, I think it's really cute 90% of the time, so she gets to shove balls at me. But if this were important that she stop doing, the rule would be we do not play ball inside. We just don't. I will get you other reinforcement. We can do a little bit of training right now. We can do a food puzzle right now. We don't play ball in the house. I don't play fetch with you in the house. I will engage with you in other ways. Now, I don't mind her doing this. So what do I do when she does this? I throw her ball, and she has learned very well that this behavior yields exactly the kind of consequences she wants. But by varying your reinforcement, you can change those expectations. So creating meaningful challenges, behaviors that challenge the dog. So perhaps, instead of, the ball gets thrown, maybe it is a food treasure hunt that is really tough for the dog to find. They're going to work independently for a good long while, and they're going to be fulfilled, and they're not going to want to seek that attention or demand bark at you. So making sure to kind of rethink what reinforcers we're using and if they are the best ones, not only for what we need to achieve and what our agenda is, but if they're the best ones for the dog's agenda and the dog's priorities. So making sure that we're considering the whole situation and really seeing the dog in front of us when we are looking at these situations where we're getting barked at. So that wraps up everything for bark. Our next chat will be about leash handling and management. As always, you can ask any questions. We can chat at my email address, liz@likemagicdogtraining.com. And you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, Like Magic Dog Training, at Like Magic Dogs, and at Like Magic Dog Training. I'll talk to you soon.